All right, cool. So I'll do a quick intro about myself and then I'll pass it off to Justin. Justin, you can pass it off to George. Just talk a little bit about like your name, your military affiliation, if you have one, how long you've been with Operation Code, and what you do for work in tech. So I'll start. I have been at Operation Code for about 5 years now. I was in the executive director position for the last almost 3 years, I believe. I am a product designer, software UI UX designer over the last 14 years. And before that, I was Air Force Reserves and a licensed clinical social worker. So I worked in healthcare, and it was really natural for me once, because I served in the Air Force as public affairs and taught myself how to code in the late 90s. Eventually moved into software design and built over, I think, 108 different applications at this point. And I am now a tech founder. So I'll pass it off to Justin.
Cool, thank you. Hey everybody, my name is Justin Cummings. I am a senior support services specialist at a project management company called ClickUp. I've been there about 2 months now. Before that, I was a sales engineer for an e-commerce platform called Channel Advisor. And before that, I had been a series of cold call salespeople, strictly just turn and burn, get them on the phone, dial until they die, get them to buy. That was my lifestyle for quite a while. I was in the Army for 10 years. I joined in 99 when I was 17, got out in 2008. I enjoyed working in tech. It was kind of a different place for me, a place I hadn't considered before, and a place I didn't realize was open to me until I found, resources, tools that were available to me. But that's kind of me in a nutshell. George?
Yeah. Hey, I'm George. So I'll get this out of the way. Was not in the military at all. I was invited to participate in Operation Code by a member there 10, 12 years ago. It was a long time ago. But basically because I've been involved for even longer with boot camps, and she was going through the boot camp. I was like the guy sitting in the back of the boot camps as a working professional, just kind of helping out. So I've been mostly involved on Slack for a long time, and where I am in the industry currently, I am engineering lead of delivery at 90.io. Where I actually work with a bunch of people who used to be at ClickUp until about a year ago. But I've had a long career for almost 20 years now. Very traditional path of like started coding in middle school, then did computer science, and even got my master's in computer science, and then worked in industry, all sorts of roles. Mostly development focused, but also management ever since.
By the way, George is one of our tech mentors at Operation Code. So if you are, I think our bot is down at the moment, but our email to request a mentor is, I think it's mentorship. I'm putting it in the chat at operationcode.org if you are looking to join. And Christelle, if you can put the join page link on there as well. So let's start off. Okay, we're going to get this out of the way. What happened? What in the world happened in the last 2 years, right? When everybody was like, oh my God, am I safe? Am I going to lose my job? You think you're safe, and then all of a sudden you get the 15-minute thing on your calendar, and they're like, hey, we love your work, but we're cutting your role. So I'll go last. Let's start with George this time and go around.
Yeah. So we want to talk about my thoughts on what happened in general, or what specifically happened with layoffs?
What specifically happened? Your personal story.
Yeah. I've actually been to 2 layoffs, so I can talk to. The first one was back in 2019, where I had been with a company for, at that point, like 9 years, working my way up from like a developer to director. And we had gotten bought the year before, and we had, basically the company that was absorbing us, we were still run as an independent unit within it, but they were cutting costs, and we had two directors, and basically they over the course of that year, I was at the front of the wave, but they pushed out like all of the former leadership, and it's not going great for them. The most recent layoff was back in August, so August 2024. I was at a company called Block Power. I'd spent a lot of time trying to move into climate tech as an industry. I worked pretty hard to do that. So I'd been there for a little under 2 years. This is a company that did a lot of stuff, did. But it was, in my opinion, very poorly managed from the top. Basically, tried to do way too much stuff without really ever checking in with the people on the ground on like what sort of things are reasonable to accomplish. So a big pattern of the CEO promising everything to everyone and basically digging himself a hole where after a while they just couldn't make it out of, and they started cutting people and cut people again. So I was part of the third wave of cuts, I believe. And then eventually they cut more people, and now there's hardly anyone left at the company. There's still a couple. They're running on fumes.
Wow.
Justin?
Okay, yeah. So mine was a pretty interesting story. So I found my role like 2 months after graduating my boot camp in February of 22. It was my first role as a sales engineer, as a non-coding role, but like an understanding of those principles and concepts was really important. You had to be able to talk to clients who may or may not have that same type of foundational knowledge, and it was still important to be able to express value to these people, even while talking about like abstract technological concepts. So when I started there, one of the things you learn as a salesperson, even in any kind of sales capacity, is you got to make money. And my first quarter at Channel Advisor they did not do well, and then the second quarter they didn't do well, and the third quarter they didn't do well, and they were acquired. And like when you work in sales, you can kind of see the writing on the wall, right? I wasn't a salesperson, I wasn't directly responsible for that, but when you see your company not doing well quarter after quarter after quarter, 3 in a row, it was a dead ringer for something else to happen. And shortly later we were acquired, and although they waited for layoffs, there was 3 rounds. They first got a lot of people in the end of 22, then they got another round at the beginning of 23, and then a third round at the end, towards the mid to last part of 22. And that's kind of where they got me. I was one of the last to go. It was a cool role. I really enjoyed my time at Channel Advisor, but yeah, you could see the writing on the wall, especially when you work in a sales support capacity.
Yeah, my story is I was hit twice. One, I think in 2020, early 2022. To be honest, this was a director role, and similar to George, they were getting rid of their senior leadership to try to trim the fat. And it was unexpected, but not super surprising considering this was mainly government contract work, although I was sitting in corporate. So director of all product design and communications, I was wearing way too many hats in that role. And so I wasn't sad to leave because I was on the verge of burnout. Got hired pretty much within a month working for a health tech startup that had just landed their Series B round. They were doing well, they were growing, but I think the leadership, again, they were kind of struggling on the product side, right? Trying to whittle down what were main features, what had to go out. And then I was the first one to go in a whole series of, they cut their entire tech team pretty much, including the co-founder, which was the CTO. And so that kind of told me there was some power dynamics in the mix that wasn't healthy. And then on top of that, they decided to lay off all their internal staff and outsource overseas, so that they can say to to make their next round, hey, like, if you invest in us, right, this is how much you're going to get in return. And this is how much we got out of our profit margin by reducing the US staffing. And It's really, the products really paid the price, unfortunately, because of that. And after that, I took a good like 4 or 5 months. Really, to me, it was more like I'm looking for my next role where I need a break from just the constant agile environment, right? And we needed to be more strategic about product, especially since I'm on the product design side and I do a lot of like strategic thinking. I worked with executive leadership to roll out new features. So I think like from my experience, the next question I want to ask is really like, when you got laid off and impacted, were you guys looking just to get hired, or did you have kind of a theory in mind of like, no, I will not work for XYZ, or like what was the plan in your head? Were you just kind of cold applying, or what happened there? Justin?
I mean, for me, I think it kind of depends on your strategy and how you want to approach it. But for me, I had already kind of looked around for other stuff, like, because you can only see performance go so badly for so long before something has to give. And I was already kind of putting myself out there, seeing what was out there. I was already interviewing at other places the same week the layoff had occurred. I think what was really important for me was identifying what I needed and what kind of roles I was going to be a good fit for early on. And also there was like some personal goals too, since I had, I wasn't going to let this layoff defeat me, since I'd kind of transitioned from the cold call sales into tech. I didn't want to backpedal. I didn't want to find myself in that same kind of role, 6, 8 months later. So I was really focused on, finding roles that fit me and fit the need that I wanted to fit. But at the same time, I also wanted to work at a different type of company. And I took a lot of time to really understand what I wanted from a role and what kind of companies would be a good fit for me. And that did take some time to build, and like I had a really extended layoff. I was unemployed for 10 months, and I don't think I found what I was really looking for at least 6 months. It took me some time to kind of identify the role I would be a good fit for and the type of companies where I think I had the most impact.
Yeah, George?
Okay. So there's two things, I think, which I think people are missing a lot of time. So first of all, I'll say this: like, if you're laid off, good job. You're already in a better position than people who are entry level. Like, you have some connections, you have some experience on your resume, and I think it's important to acknowledge that is powerful. And a lot of times, people in our position do get to skip at least some of the line. I think so. So there's two things, right? There's what you want, and I could talk about that a little bit, and then there's also the strategy that you go about it. And a lot of the times, when I see people looking around, like they don't really have a strategy. The strategy is like, I don't know, I'm going on LinkedIn and applying a lot. And there is, I mean, Justin, you're a sales guy, so there's a lot more to it than that. Cynthia, I'm sure you know as well.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, as far as what I wanted, like, so the first time, I at that point had been in consulting for 10 years, working as a consultant, jumping into other people's projects, largely doing a good job. But then you do a good job, you leave. And I had moved into that role very purposefully because I had built up a lot of opinions on how to build software. And I wanted to test them. And that was where I got an opportunity to test them out. Just lots and lots and lots of reps. So I came there with these stories. And then I wanted to take that back to the product side. I wanted to work at a product company. Anytime I look, I do absolutely have stuff I don't want to do, and things that I do want to do. So I was kind of looking at at least vaguely social good thing at the time. So in the first time, that was the big focus. Get out of consulting, move into product, ideally into kind of a more traditional managerial role, because I had been in a role where I was like culture building and basically a dev advocate internally, but it doesn't really translate into the into the product world. In fact, one of the things I found out was that the actual language that was used in consulting and the language that was used on the product side was like very different. And I had a good 2 months of interviewing where just really the result of that was, okay, I need to like spend some time talking to people and figure out how to adjust my language. And then this last layoff, so I personally, we've got a lot of stuff going around, so there was a lot more. But look, I want to get a job as soon as possible. In this particular case, I was less targeted as far and less focused on what to do. So like previously, I had worked in climate tech, before that B Corp, before that nonprofit. Now I was like, you know, I have my list of things I don't want to do, but like I was a lot more open to it. And basically because I was like, I got to get back to work in this case as soon as possible, I kind of pulled the ripcord, which I hadn't done very much, and really started working my network in a way that usually I don't do as much, because I am usually targeting an industry or something like that. And often I'm targeting the industry because I don't have contacts there to begin with. Well, in this case, I was just like, let's do it. I can kind of talk about strategy a bit later, but yeah, I've been talking so long.
I think for me, I noticed this time around that the industry, it took a lot longer to land. Like normally for me, especially with my experience and the amount of people I know, I land something very quickly, like within a few weeks or a month. And it's really mainly me blocking how fast I want to go, just because I'm like, this is the industry I want to be in. These are the type of people I want to work with. And remember, like when you're being interviewed, you're also interviewing them, the company, right? Or your hiring manager, or, you know, the people that you're going to be working with. You're interviewing them to find out if that's the right fit. And a lot of, like, even this time around, I felt like I wasn't even able to break through to get to that final round. Like I would get through the first few interviews and then never make it to like the final offer. And so it was really frustrating. And I think the battle for me was more mental, because people actually said like, you're overqualified, you know, and I was applying for individual contributor roles because I'm like, okay, I had just exited a startup after 10 years, got acquired, right? So money wasn't too difficult, but I was rolling the acquisition into the newer startup, which is in health tech. And it's focused on workforce burnout prevention. So it's bringing back like my social work roots and more of my clinical work. And so that was what I had on the horizon. But like when you run a company, especially even at Operation Code, I don't pay myself at Operation Code. To me, it's like the nonprofit that I give back. It's my pro bono thing, right? And I make sure the staff is paid and make sure our impact is there and our programs are taken care of. So similar to that, when you're running a startup, there's times as a founder that you need to sacrifice your own income, and you have to make sure you pay your people and grow and look at your strategy. And so at the same time, I didn't mention this, when I got laid off by the health tech company that was based in Austin, my mom was going through like chemotherapy, was going through like major advanced cancer treatments. And I think that's what stung the most, was that it wasn't just a business decision. It wasn't just here, we're just going to lay all these people off, right? Because I was like one of the first people to go. It was hey, we know that your mom is struggling and you're literally sitting beside her getting chemotherapy while you're being let go. And then it was oh, by the way, we're going to give you very, very little severance, and we're going to now fight with you over the equity of the intellectual property that you built. That I think hit me harder, where getting back and I call it re-entry, like re-entering the workforce, it really did a number on me mentally, because as a veteran who has PTSD, I'm like, who do I trust? And where do I want to spend my energy? Because if I'm spending my energy and pouring forth like more of my creative impact, and I'm dealing with elderly parents, right? And like kids. So to be in that sandwich generation and to work for somebody that doesn't understand that, I got to the point where I'm like, I'm no longer doing that. I'm at a level of my career where I am no longer going to just get a paycheck just because I need to pay the bills. And if I needed to, like, yes, I would just pick up whatever. And so don't take that as my position was I could survive for that like 5 months. It was really like, it wasn't 10 months. Justin, I feel your pain because there was a while there you were like going through the interviews and like, what am I doing wrong? And like, why am I not landing anything? And it's, you know, you're looking at the, oh my God, it could be a year, right? And how much longer? And then that kind of anxiety creeps up. So I want to segue into like, what was the most terrifying part of being laid off? And it was, you know, for me, it was the mental aspect and keeping myself afloat to know that it wasn't a personal decision, but to really start feeding my soul. And so the first part of the question is like, what were the most terrifying things about the layoff? And then second, what did you do to build yourself up? Anybody can jump in here.
Um, so the terrifying thing. So because I mentor and also because I know not to trust companies or anything that, like, I mean, it's, frankly, the whole trust in the company and loyalty thing is not even like, yeah, like it's not like I'm grumpy about it. It's not even part of my mental model of how companies work. But I do, because of that, like, keep very tight tabs on the job market. Um, so like I'm like, this is part of the reason why in operations code I'm always in the career advice, like, because I like to give advice, but also because I keep tabs on it, and there's many slacks where I do that. So I had a pretty good idea that the last few years has been a particularly tough time. Um, I also knew that, you know, I got laid off in August. I knew from past experience that if I didn't have a job come early November, I probably wasn't going to get one in that Q4 low. So it was definitely and at the same time, like, basically that week we found out we've been waiting on house construction that we have to do for federal grant, that was going to be kicking off. Also, my grandmother got really sick. So there was just like a lot of stuff that happened at the same time. And it was definitely that moment of like, I really need to turn this around kind of rapidly so that I can focus on other things. And knowing that if I didn't, it's going to very easily be like 6 months, 7 months. And I'm very confident interviewing and things like that. But I also know, like my experience, I've been like really gathering people's experience and trying to like formulate a number around this. Like, my take on it, at least in kind of senior level engineering manager and developer roles, like principal stuff, that you probably have to go through like 5 or so final round interviews where everyone's like, you did great, to get one offer. And so I was like, I really got to back it in. And that was the stress. And then not just that, but like kind of second guessing myself when I have like a big, you know, I'm in 4 different interview processes. All of them are giving me great responses. But then like, now there's a week that nobody reaches out to me. Okay. And then I'm like second guessing myself again and again and again. Do I need to be filling up my pipeline? Well, I've got all this other stuff I need to focus on as well. Should I be doing that? All those little minute, small decisions.
For me, when it got really scary was the week I was laid off. One of my peers from my Operation Code meetings, he said, "Don't worry, you'll get a job." I was like, "Oh, I know. I'm happy for you." He's like, "But it'll be next year," and that's when I was just like, "Oh God," because I was laid off in the first week of October in 22. So it was just like, that's gonna be. He wasn't wrong. It was good. I knew Like say, so like to realize that you're gonna be laid off in the latter part of the year, to know that I'm gonna be unemployed, you know, for the rest of the year and possibly for even the next 6 months, right off the bat, that made it really scary. That set the heartbeat off, that set all the anxiety alarms off. And I immediately just started to kick it into high gears. Like, okay, I gotta do something. I gotta, cause like I wanted to come out of like that same lull that George was talking about, but like on fire. And I'm not kidding. I was getting like emails for interviews the same week of Christmas. I didn't get any of those jobs, but I still got those calls for interviews. And like that's when it was really scary for me. And the second time was when it was really scary was when it was getting close to a year. It was 2 months before it had been a year, and I was just like, what has happened? What have I done? And like the idea was like slowly starting to creep in that I was gonna have to go back to what I did before I transitioned into tech, that I was gonna be forced to go back into cold call sales because I knew I could make money, but I knew that wasn't a career path that I wanted to pursue anymore. And I felt since I had a non-traditional background and having the traditional college degree or the traditional training in like discipline that like George has, I felt like I was gonna be the easiest to like, you know, dismiss and say, oh, he's not a good fit for this role because he doesn't have a CS degree, because he doesn't have 5 years programming experience. I really thought that was going to put me at a disadvantage. And having to like reconcile with those facts every day was really, really hard. The only way I kind of enabled myself was one, doing the work. Like I put in the chat earlier, activity is everything. If you're putting out 5 applications a week, that is not enough. That's not enough. And I talk to people every week who are doing that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And like in 2023, I think in the first quarter, it was something like 250,000 people were laid off in tech. That was the first quarter. I think it was something like a competition between roles that were open the year before. It increased by nearly 30% in a year. And we're still in the tail end of that market. Like just knowing that I was doing the right work and that was the only thing I could convince myself helped me get through the day, right? Because when you've had that 5th interview and you didn't get it, and the only feedback is, oh, I don't know, you know, when you, or nothing at all. And like the only person you can talk to about it is yourself. You have to kind of find out, hey, what can I do? You know, what work helped me to get to this point? How can I improve? And you got to be able to put yourself out there, find people who are going to be access points to your support networks to be like, hey, this is what you need to kind of get over this. And I'm just really glad I had that kind of stuff because those moments came and they were real and they were scary.
I am really like proud of the fact that the KC folks are super involved and they literally just show up for each other. You know, I love that. And
We have a good group.
they're a really good group and they stepped up. They were like, what do you need, brother? Like, do we need to help you do algorithm prep or interview prep? And they like reached out to connections. And so I think like within our community in general, people are really willing, if they know that you are looking, they're willing to step up and call their connections, all of our connections, right? And I think I was better at getting other people jobs than I was myself because I lean back on the fact that like I'm an advocate at heart, right? I'm really good at stepping up to the plate for other people. It is harder for me to advocate for myself. It is harder for me to ask for help. It is harder for me to be humble, right? Because everybody looks at me and they're like, you know everybody and you've done everything. And while that might be true on one level, the other level is it's really hard to ask for help. And it's really hard to say, look, like I am hit by a layoff and I need to land somewhere. And so the next question we're going to run into is where did you end up landing? And I'll start first. I ended up going into a university. I'm at American University, which I did not foresee or expect or think about. I really didn't even consider it an option. And I'm in a really interesting, not in a faculty role, but I'm in a really interesting role where it's half communications and half tech. So part of it is going back to my public affairs roots in the military. Half, you know, another part of it is traditional communications, doing a lot of strategy, and then growing. So the lab is called Polarization, Extremism, Research and Innovation Lab. And so they sit within the School of Public Affairs. It's evidence-based, and they do a lot of like data analysis on the movement of extremism, what causes it, why do people gravitate towards certain things, why do people act a certain way. And so like it's really interesting because it's taking like my clinical background and specializing in trauma, right? And especially with what's happening right now because it's an election year. And then the other part of it is tech, right? So we have a ton of like training modules, like video campaigns. We've got like our different sites, our different LMSs for the multiple programs, which they call like learning inoculation. So then you take that and you do data analysis on like, does it work? Does it not work? So it's really interesting. I did not see myself in this role. I am being transparent, taking like I'm making a third of what I used to make in tech. But I think for me, I took this role because I needed a break from traditional tech. I felt like being part of something that made impact and was meaningful was what I needed mentally more than financially, right? But obviously I can't stay in that role forever. I basically said, hey, I will stay here a year, see where it goes, do some really great things, and then be open. And so that's really where I landed, and I've met some really amazing people and done some pretty cool things. George, where did you end up?
Um, so I'm at a company called 90. A week before my layoff, I had been involved with the company, like just tracking down at Block Power, tracking down like this really absurdly silly and very, very in the weeds and difficult JavaScript bug, which happened to be like due to an interplay of the really stupid way the Next.js does stuff and how web protocols work. So I just thought that was really an interesting story, and I wrote it up on my blog. And I had published it on Sunday, and then Monday morning I had a meeting on my calendar pop up. But I hadn't actually hit the big publish button yet, so I rewrote the first paragraph of my blog post. It was just like, this is a story about the bug, but by the way, I am job hunting, and I posted that, and I promoted a tiny bit, like basically posted on LinkedIn again with a message that I'm looking for stuff. The interesting thing was that that thing is partially because it was I think an interesting story in its own right, not just about job hunting, got a decent amount of eyes on it and a lot of people reading it. And I started having people kind of from my past, like I have an actual list that I maintain of like people that I've worked with and I would love to work with again. And then that doesn't say anything about anyone that isn't on the list, but like that's just like the list that I was expecting to target, and like reaching out to people for networking. But I just had people who I'd worked with before that I hadn't put on the list, just reaching out to me saying like, hey, I saw on LinkedIn, have you looked at my company? So one of the people was a project manager I had worked with in the past, and she's now at 90. They basically create software for running businesses. So it's less office ops and more like, this is the sort of it's a very like opinionated, this is the sort of meetings you should have, this is how you should structure them. There's a whole what they call an operating system around it, EOS if anyone's heard. So this is an implementation of that. It's a very cool company. Well, it's cool as far as like business software is. But I mean, I do enjoy it. And one of the things that really stood out is like in their interviews, just like they really impressed me. They really did. And they're very thoughtful. The head of engineering there was basically like, my goal was never to do a layoff again. I've had to do them. It sucks. And specifically, I ended up running delivery, which is not a thing I had thought of myself before. Like, I very much said I'm not an ops person in the past, but also I've ended up in the position a lot of times where I have to do ops stuff because nobody else is doing it. And at my previous company, I'd ended up building all their cloud ops stuff essentially and leading a team that did that. So that happened to align really, really well with what they were looking for and kind of came on board doing that. And unlike my past employer, they actually have like a team of more than 2 people supporting. So that's nice.
Justin, where did you end up?
I ended up at a project management company called ClickUp. If you've heard of Trello, Atlassian, Jira, ClickUp, one and the same, a lot of those. When I was laid off, I knew it took me some time to realize this, but I intentionally started targeting like different technologies, different companies. But when I made that choice of like what I was going to target, was like, well, okay, what's going to be different? Like when I worked at Channel Advisor, I don't want to say it was an entrenched company, but it was a company that had the same platform for 20 years. And a lot of their technology and a lot of their teams were really siloed and separated. It was kind of hard to integrate and talk to each other. And at the same time, it kind of felt like working with old rusty metal. You know what I mean? That's what it felt like. This is a platform that hasn't really innovated or changed much or done much in 20 years. And you can tell, and your customers can tell, and everybody can feel it. And I'm just like, I don't like working like this. I want to work with a company that's a lot more nimble, that's working on, next gen or like the latest and the next greatest thing in technology, the latest cool stuff. And I really wanted to feel like I was part of innovation, and I wanted to be a little bit more nimble in my work. I wanted to have a closer connection to the teams that are supporting the platform that I love, or support the platform that I love working on. And that's when I was really like, okay, what companies are doing that? And that really helped me narrow where I was going to end up. And I really feel like that helped my job search a lot too. Because I didn't want to work for an older company. I wanted to work for a newer company. But I wanted to work for a company that was designing something latest, like the latest and greatest thing. I was going to have to be really specific in like what kind of platforms, what kind of services, what kind of technology I want to target, what kind of stuff I wanted to be a part of. And that's what really helped me end up at ClickUp, because I wanted a company that was like targeting growth, looking for growth, and had a lot of room for expansion. And at the same time, if anyone's familiar with ClickUp, they do announce product releases almost daily. It's crazy what they do with like how quickly they can get a product from ideation to development to like deployment in a matter of weeks and days sometimes. And I wanted to be part of that. And that's kind of what helped me end up where I am now. I'm super fortunate to be here. I'm really lucky to be part of this organization. But at the same time, this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. I didn't just trip and fall face first into a cool job. I put a lot of legwork into like targeting, filtering, identifying the best opportunities, the best companies I thought I would be a good fit for, and especially like roles that were already a good fit for me at those companies. And that's kind of what made the difference in like where I was and like how I ended up where I ended up.
Awesome. I have a feeling the audience is going to have questions because some of you may be worried about your job, the viability of your job, or right now going through a layoff. So I want to give ample time for Q&A. The last question I want to go through takeaways is like, if you were to do it over again, what would you change? And if you don't have anything to change, while you're in this role, are you always looking like over your shoulder, right? Like you got let go and then you're like, oh my gosh, I could get let go again. Like when does it stop? When do you start to feel comfortable with yourself? So either question. For me, I think really making sure that I'm taking care of myself, right? Because I was taking care of family. And when you're a primary caregiver and you have a major family member that's sick, it's a lot of strain on you, right? And then financially too. So you're like, I'm taking care of everybody. I'm taking care of staff. I'm taking care of my family. I'm taking care of veterans. And I had to just press pause for a second and go, all right, how are you going to take care of yourself, Cynthia? And so whether it's getting out, going outside, doing that kayak, going for a long walk, hiking, whatever it is, nature, identifying the things that feed you. And then the second thing I did is I signed up to volunteer as a paramedic with my local firehouse because I was on line all the time. I was on my computer, I was isolated, I'm in my house or, at the, common shared work center or whatever. And I wasn't really communicating with people. So I needed to get out there, do a bit of grunt work, like face to face, not be on a platform, a digital screen. And that was super helpful because there were times where, you're like doing an extra thing. You're basically task switching from one thing that might be repetitive, right? Like that applying for jobs and interviewing. And sometimes at the end of the week, you feel really drained and it can drain you when you're not getting like the feedback that you want. And most companies legally, they can't tell you why. Sometimes if you have a small startup or a really great hiring manager, they may say, hey, you did really great on this. We can't necessarily talk about other things to improve, and they might, but more so you'll find companies that are not able to because their legal team says you can't. So those are the ways that I felt like I had to give back to myself. And then in the meanwhile, it's not like I'm looking over my shoulder, worried about my job security, but I'm always looking at, hey, as I'm growing this startup, right? Like the end goal for me is to end up being completely full-time paid at my newest startup. And not only am I able to pay all my stuff, I can now pay myself, right? And so that's ultimately the end goal. My current company, the team that I'm with, understands that. And they know that they're able to work with me. But at the same time, I'm like, hey, let's have that conversation. If you know somebody that is looking to hire, or and the next part 2 in November is going to be about that. We're bringing on 2 technical recruiters and a hiring manager, and they'll talk more about, does AI work when you're changing your resume, or what are things that they've seen that help land people roles, because they do it all the time. They talk to folks all the time. That's their job. So that's part 2 at the end of November, right before Thanksgiving week. But yeah, I'll go to George or Justin. Go ahead and any last words on your strategy or like things that you had to do to take care of yourself.
I mean, I'll tell you, hold on, George. I want to get this out real quick. So I'll tell you this is like, I've only been in my role a little over 2 months now, right? So do I have this sensation that everything's hunky-dory, dandy fine? No, not at all. This is just the stillness of the calm right now. Like everything's fine, everything's cool, but in the back of my head, I'm like, I spent nearly everything I had just to survive a 10-month layoff. You know what I mean? I need to rebuild my finances. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to get ready for the next thing. And on top of that, I'm considering buying a home here in the next year. So adding to all of that, I had to find distraction, right? For me, it was rediscovering exercise and like PT, good old PT. I mean, if you've any of our veterans out there for our military people, I will tell you, like nothing got me out of my head faster than, running around the block. Nothing reminded me that I was okay and I could still do something about, my mental health, as opposed to getting a beer or doing something self-destructive. Just getting some exercise, getting outside, taking a walk, spending some time with the dog, anything to remove me from that situation is anything that helped. And I would intentionally find stuff like, just like any other job, I had to find a reason to disconnect and find something else to inspire me, to involve me. And I really enjoy working with our local group at Operation Code. We have a lot of people who come through who aren't necessarily tech people, but people who need help with interviews or struggle like finding like a job search strategy or even working on their resume. And man, if you think you don't need help on your resume, ask someone else. I promise you they'll have an opinion, and it might be a good idea. It might not be, but it's always worth having other people look at your resume. But I really found value in like knowing that there were other people like me, because I hated like when I would needed support, I would chime in on like the Operation Code Slack. But like I hated when somebody with a job would tell me how to do it. It just made me nuts inside. I don't know why. So I intentionally found a group called the Job Search Council, and it was just people who didn't have jobs, who were just like me. Not everybody was a tech person, but they were people just like me who were unemployed or had been unemployed for a little while. And being able to talk to those people and commune with those people and hear how some of them were struggling made it a lot easier to know that like it wasn't just me. I wasn't alone out here, and there's other people besides me, besides people in tech, going through the same stuff. And just being able to interact and commune with those people helped me like deal with the reality of my situation every single day.
Yeah, amazing, man.
Um,
George.
so first of all, like I said, I don't ever feel like fully secure at a job. It's just, I mean, every time I've gotten laid off, I'm like, yep, I understand what's happening. Okay. Like, I understand why you're doing this. I think it's a bad idea, but okay. um, the, um, but I will say, like, at my current job, like, they seem to be doing all the things right to not have to do those. Um, as I think I played it really, really well this time around. My previous time, I think the biggest thing that I really should have done was like I thought was really go out earlier and start talking to people at product companies and ask them for like some mock interviews and things like that. Because the language thing, just the fact that when people talked about management and consulting and talked about management in product companies, they were talking about like very different type of things that I would be asked about, like performance reviews, where that's not really how we talk about it in consulting or really even think about it, things like that. Um, I wish I had talked to people earlier who would have helped me like hone in on the fact that I didn't have answers to those things, but some of those terms or some of those concepts were just not how I'd heard them, and not how I encountered. I think I adjusted there, but by the time I adjusted, we were in the Christmas lull, and it took a while to start the engine back up again. So yeah.
I'm opening up the floor. So folks in the audience, feel free to either type your question or share your story if you want to come off mute. This is your time, so I'd like you to pick the brain of people that are here. How can we help you figure out what you need to do, or just affirm what you're doing? I think that's another big thing too, right? Just knowing that you're either on the right path, and where to go.
Everyone's like just listening while doing dishes or something.
How many of you actually work in tech? Just to raise a hand, you could do the little emoji thing if you want. What are your thoughts on relocating for a job?
Nope. Williams raising hands. I mean, my thoughts on relocating for a job is I generally won't do it, but I'm in a position where I don't have to if I had to. Okay. It's really tough. I'm in New Orleans. Like, remote is kind of the only option for me. I'm priced out of anything local. And my family is down here. I came down here while my family still lived in Connecticut, and then my brother ended up moving down here. My grandparents, my parents ended up moving down here. So, like, to leave would be difficult on a bunch of different levels. And I am very fortunate that I kind of have this long record of working remote and being very senior where I don't really have to. But there's absolutely no shade in that at all. And the logistics of it seem dauntingly difficult, honestly, of even just interviewing at places where moving where you might have to move, because like companies don't generally like think about that in accommodating like interviews, right?
Yeah, if they're not going to pay you for an interview, or they're not going to pay you relocation fees, that might be a really difficult decision. Justin, you look like you're going to say something.
Well, at the same time, it also feels kind of antiquated. Really, it does feel kind of antiquated. Like, if they're willing to pay for you to move to wherever they need you to be to live there, how much money could they have saved just by keeping you remote? Because then you'd be happier. They'd spend less money. I don't understand why. I know I'm not a business owner. I don't make those types of decisions. But at the same time, it's like, no, I wouldn't relocate for a job. But then again, if I needed a job, they offered me one, and it was gonna pay me. Yeah, I would have done it. I would have done it. I will tell you, is like when like after my layoff, I live in Kansas City, hardly like the Silicon Valley, anything like that. It's not on the coasts. It's very centralized, and it's not like the major technical hub. So a lot of people don't consider it like a major commerce port either. So what do you do with that? I really thought about I'm going to have to move. I'm going to have to relocate. There's no way I'm going to find another remote job that offers me the same things I was looking for. So I was really prepared to relocate. I didn't want to, but I was ready to, especially if that was an option. But I would also say is like if you want to work for a company and they're willing to relocate you, know that beforehand. That feels like something you'd be able to find out very, very quickly. And in this day and age, most business owners are very clear about, hey, we're going to require you to be in person. Like they're going to be if it's a hybrid or fully remote or some kind of workplace. So would I relocate for a role? Not especially.
Will, you had
I
your
will
hand
say
up.
though.
Yeah.
Oh, just really quick. If you are talking remote roles, ask if they support working in your state first. That's something I learned last time.
Mhm.
It's not that uncommon to run into even sizable companies and go, we can't hire in that state because they have to set up a whole new tax regime to do that.
But usually when you apply, they'll have, hey, especially if it's a fully remote role, because like I was applying for exclusively for remote roles because I applied for what I could in Kansas City, but I wasn't going to get a lot of those roles. I'm not a Java developer, and that's what's really big here in this area. So it's really regionalized for like what kind of tech works in that area. But for me, it was just really about like focusing on like where I could land up and like how I could find those types of roles. And just that's what really helped make the difference for me. So I mean, but especially if you look on applications, almost every application, if it's a remote role, will tell you if it's good. Well, almost all. They should. It saves everybody else a lot of time.
They go like, no one from Louisiana has ever applied here. What are you talking?
Will, did you have your hand up?
It might have been an answer to the previous question. Okay, yeah.
Responding that he works in tech. Okay. Yeah, I did. I did ask. All right. Well, thank you all for attending. If you guys have any other questions, and you're on our Slack, I think Crystal posted the join link. If not, go to operationcode.org/join. Zoom on Linux does yeah, I've heard that for people who have Linux that have had issues with their mics. All right. But yeah, thank you for joining, and thank you for Justin and George for adding your thoughts. Look forward, if you following us on our Eventbrite, Operation Code's Eventbrite, it's the November Tech Talk is already posted, so you can sign up for that. And we'll have Todd Bauer, I believe Henry No, and a guy from Underground Admin, a guy named Mike Rosenberg, is going to be on for next month. So you can pick their brains on, and they also do recruiting, like headhunter type work. So if you are looking for a role, or looking forward, they are really great people to know. So look forward to our November event. And then Justin said, please reach out to me via LinkedIn. Yep, same here. I'll post my LinkedIn name. You find me there, I'll add you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.